Okay, so in this video, our goal is to add and subtract radicals. Now, before we do anything, I want you to understand that radicals are like variables. You can only add like radicals. So if I have 2 times the square root of 3, and I'm trying to add that to 2 times the square root of 5, I can't add these. And the reason is what's under the radical here is the square root of 3, and what's under the radical here is the square root of 5. And so this is as simple as it gets. I cannot add that. Okay, so let's look at one that you could add. And so let's say I have 2 times the square root of 3 plus 5 times the square root of 3. So what I'm saying here is I'm saying I have 2 square roots of 3's. And here I have 5 square roots of 3's. Well, you can see what's under the radical in both is the same, so I can add them. And so this is going to equal 7 square roots of 3's. Okay? Because what's under the radical is the same in both, I am able to add them. Now, let's look at the problem they give us. It says square root of 32 minus the square root of 18. Right? So what I want to do there is I want to subtract the 2, but since what's under the radical is not the same, I can't. But what let's do is let's simplify the square root of 32. Let's break it down like we did in the previous video, and let's break down square root of 18 and see once we break them down and simplify them, is what's under the radical the same. So I've got square root of 32, and I want to break it down. Well, what times what's 32? Well, there's a lot of things, but obviously I can see that 2 goes into it, so I'm going to write it as 2 times 16. And then what times what is 16? Well, 2 times 8. So I'm going to write it as the square root of 2 times 8 times 2, right? So 2 times 8 times 2 will give me 32. Well, let's break down 8. 8 is 4 times 2, so I've got the square root of 2 times 2 times 2 times 4, right? Well, 4 is a perfect square, so I don't want to break it down. And let's multiply 2 times 2 and get 4 right there. And so what I'll have is square root of 2 times 4 times 4. Now, if you multiplied 2 times 4 times 4, you would get what you started with, right? You'd get this square root of 32 here. So we know it's exactly the same, okay? Now, remember, to take something out of the radical, it has to be a perfect square, and you have to take the square root of it. So what's the square root of 4? It's 2. So I can mark it out here, and I can put a 2 on the outside. And what's the square root of this 4? It's 2. So I can mark it out, and I can put a 2 on the outside. And the stuff on the outside is all getting multiplied. So the square root of 32 is the same thing as 2 times 2, which is 4, and what's left on the inside, square root of 2. So if you typed in your calculator the square root of 32, and then you typed in your calculator 4 times the square root of 2, they'd both give you the same answer. It's because they're the same, but this right here is the most simplified version. And so I'm going to write it up here. I'm going to write 4 square root of 2. And we're subtracting from it the square root of 18. Well, let's simplify the square root of 18. Well, the square root of 18 is the same thing as the square root of 2 times 9. Well, I'm not going to break down 9 because it's a perfect square. And so what's the square root of 9? It's 3, so I'm going to mark it out, and I'm going to put the 3 on the outside so you can see that square root of 18 is the same thing as 3 square roots of 2. And so now let's look at what we've got. Remember, we said that 4 square root of 2 is the same thing as the square root of 32, right? And we said that the square root of 18 is the same thing as 3 square roots of 2. So when we subtract this minus this, that's the same as subtracting this minus this. And that's nice because now what's in the radical is a 2, and what's in the radical here is a 2, and so I can subtract them. So what's 4 minus 3? It's 1. And so your answer is 1 square roots of 2, or you could just write square root of 2. This is the same as this. So in Khan Academy, what I would put is I would put 1 square root of 2 Okay, what I have right here is the same thing as 1 square root of 2. Or you could just leave this blank and just put a square root of 2 here, and it'll give you the same result. So let's look at example 2. Notice on example 2, it's wanting me to add all three of these. And here I have square root of 28 plus the square root of 175 plus the square root of 112. Okay? And this 28 is not the same as that 175, which is not the same as that 112, so I can't add them. But let's simplify each radical and then see if what's left can be added. So let's do one at a time. Let's start with the square root of 28. So I'm going to write right here, square root of 28. And then I think, what goes into 28? Well, the square root of 28 is the same thing as 4 times 7, right? 4 times 7 is 28. And I can see right here I have a perfect square, so I can take the square root of 4, and it gives me 2, so I take it out of there and I put 2 on the outside. So square root of 28 is the same thing as 2 square roots of 7. Okay, so I'm going to write it up here at the top, 2 square roots of 7 plus, now let's simplify the square root of 175. So I'm going to write right here the square root of 175. Let me make sure that's what it said. And let's think about what goes into 175. Well, right off the bat, it looks like 25 does. So it's the same thing as the square root of 25 times 7, I think. 25 times 4 is 100, times 3 more, yeah, it's 175. And I can see that 25 is a perfect square. What's the square root of 25? It's 5, so I can take it out of there and I can put a 5 on the outside. So the square root of 175 is the same thing as 5 square roots of 7. Okay, now what's nice is you can see right here that what's under the radical is the same as what's under the radical here. So let's go up here and let's write 5 square roots of 7. So I've got 5 square roots of 7. All right, and then let's go to simplify the square root of 112. So let's move where we've got some space, and I'm going to write the square root of 112. And thinking about what goes into 112, let's try 4. So I've got 112 divided by 4. 4 goes into 11 2 times, leaving me 32, and that's 8. So it's going to be 4, the square root of 4 times 28. And then 28 is 4 times 7, so that's going to be the square root of 4 times 4 times 7. Well, look, I've got a perfect square here and here. The square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of 4 is 2. So on the outside, I have 2 times 2, which is 4. So the square root of 112 is the same thing as 4 square roots of 7. So let's go back to the top and write plus 4 square roots of 7. And so I want you to see that the square root of 28 is the same thing as 2 square roots of 7. And the square root of 175 is the same thing as 5 square roots of 7. And the square root of 112 is the same thing as 4 square roots of 7. But now, since what's under the radical in all three of these is the same, I can add them. 2 plus 5 plus 4 is 11 square roots of 7. And so in Khan Academy, on the outside of the radical, you'd put 11, and on the inside, you'd put 7. And that means 11 square root of 7. And now, so that I know you listened to the video, I would like you to write on this problem the word Steve, the name Steve, S-T-E-V-E, in the bottom right of your paper. Write it kind of small, just so that I know that you watched and listened to the video.